My father stood up at dinner and announced, "She's always been a fraud, just makes up stories to get attention." As 30 family members stared, what they didn't know was I owned the entire restaurant. I stood up and felt the blood drain from my face as every conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clinking of silverware ceased. Even the servers paused their movements, sensing the shift in atmosphere. My mother nodded in agreement, her expression smug and satisfied. "She just makes up stories to get attention," she added, her voice carrying across the private dining room I had personally designed 3 years ago. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The humiliation was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else was building. A cold, calculating fury that I'd never experienced before. I looked around at the faces of my extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all watching this public execution of my character. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed to be enjoying the drama. But what struck me most was the realization that this was my moment. After 31 years of being dismissed, overlooked, and belittled, I finally had the ultimate trump card. They were sitting in my restaurant, eating my food, drinking my wine, celebrating in my venue, and they had absolutely no idea. I remained standing, my mind racing through the possibilities. I could end this humiliation right now with a single sentence. But something held me back. Years of strategic thinking from building my business kicked in. This wasn't just about defending myself. This was about maximum impact. If I was going to reveal the truth, I needed to do it right. I needed to make sure the lesson would stick forever. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I need some air." I walked out of that dining room with as much dignity as I could muster, but my mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning the most satisfying reveal of my life. The foundation for this moment had been building for over 2 decades. I'm Luna, and I've spent my entire adult life systematically building something my family never thought I was capable of. While they focused all their energy on celebrating my sister Natalie's every minor achievement, I was quietly developing the skills and resources that would eventually give me this incredible advantage. My professional background started in marketing, but I quickly realized I had a natural talent for understanding business operations and customer psychology. I spent 5 years working for a restaurant consulting firm, learning every aspect of the industry, from menu design to profit margins to staff management. During that time, I analyzed over 200 restaurant businesses, understanding exactly what made them succeed or fail. I knew food costs, labor percentages, prime real estate values, and customer retention strategies better than most restaurant owners themselves. While working as a consultant, I was also building my financial foundation methodically. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, drove a used car, and saved 60% of my income for 3 straight years. Every consulting fee, every bonus, every tax refund went into my investment accounts. By age 26, I had accumulated $180,000 in cash and investment assets. My family had no idea about any of this because they never asked about my life beyond surface-level pleasantries. I had 4 major strategic advantages that positioned me perfectly for restaurant ownership. First, my consulting experience gave me insider knowledge of the local market that most new owners lacked. I knew which locations had failed and why, which suppliers offered the best terms, and which marketing strategies actually worked in our city. Second, my savings gave me enough capital to avoid the debt traps that killed most new restaurants in their first year. Third, I had built relationships with key industry contacts, suppliers, contractors, equipment dealers, even food critics, who could help me launch successfully. Fourth, I had identified a specific property that I'd been watching for 2 years, knowing it would eventually become available at the right price. The property itself was my secret weapon. It was a failed restaurant space in a prime location that had defeated 3 previous owners. Most people saw it as cursed, But I saw the real problems: poor layout, inadequate kitchen equipment, and owners who didn't understand their target market. The building had excellent bones, perfect foot traffic, and available parking. The fundamental elements that couldn't be changed. Everything else could be fixed with the right capital investment and planning. When the property finally came available, I was the only buyer who understood its true potential. I purchased the building for $340,000, spent another $120,000 on renovations, and opened Luna's 6 months later. I had prepared for this opportunity for years, and when it came, I was ready to execute flawlessly. My family never asked how I could afford the apartment upgrade or the new car. They never wondered why I stopped borrowing money or seemed less stressed about finances. They were too focused on Natalie's engagement, her new job, her apartment hunting, her latest drama. While they celebrated her getting Employee of the Month at her entry-level marketing position, I was quietly building what would become one of the city's most successful independent restaurants. Now, standing outside my own restaurant after being publicly humiliated inside it, I realized I had everything I needed to turn this situation completely around. But I needed to be strategic about it. This wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about ensuring they would never underestimate me again. I pulled out my phone and called Emma, my cousin who had witnessed the entire scene. She was the only family member who had ever called out my parents' favoritism directly. "Emma, it's Luna. Can you come outside for a minute? I need to tell you something important." Emma appeared 2 minutes later, her face flushed with anger. "Luna, what they just did in there was completely inappropriate. I can't believe—" "Emma," I interrupted gently, "I own this restaurant, this entire building. Everything they're sitting in right now belongs to me." She stared at me for 10 seconds before speaking. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I've owned it for 3 years. Luna's restaurant, it's literally named after me. And I'm about to go back in there and show them exactly who they've been underestimating." Emma's expression shifted from shock to something that looked like pure joy. "Luna, this is incredible. They have no idea, do they?" "None. And I want you to watch what happens next. I'm going to handle this professionally, but I want a witness to make sure they can't rewrite history later." I spent the next 10 minutes laying out my plan to Emma. It wasn't enough to simply announce that I owned the restaurant. I needed to demonstrate the full scope of what I had built, the respect I commanded in my professional world, and the complete reversal of power dynamics they had just triggered. Emma agreed to support me and document everything. When I walked back into the dining room, I had transformed from the humiliated daughter into the strategic business owner I had worked so hard to become. My father was in the middle of another story about my supposed failures when I approached the head waiter. "Marcus," I said quietly, "could you please ask James to join us and bring the leather portfolio from my office?" Marcus nodded immediately. "Of course, Miss Luna, right away." I watched my family's faces as they registered the familiarity and respect in Marcus's response. A few eyebrows raised, but they hadn't put the pieces together yet. James appeared within 2 minutes carrying the portfolio I had requested. He was my general manager, a 20-year veteran of the restaurant industry who had helped me build Luna's into the success it had become. James understood immediately what was happening and stepped into his role perfectly. "Ladies and gentlemen," James announced to the table, "I hope you're all enjoying your evening at Luna's. We're honored to host your family celebration." He paused, making eye contact with my parents. "I'd like to take a moment to introduce the owner of this establishment, Miss Luna Blackwood, who built this restaurant into one of the city's premier dining destinations." The silence was absolute. My father's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. My mother's face went completely pale. Around the table, I watched the realization dawn on face after face. James opened the portfolio and began displaying the documents I had asked him to prepare. Property deeds with my name clearly visible, business licenses showing Luna Blackwood as owner-operator, tax documents, vendor contracts, employee agreements. all bearing my signature as the legal owner of everything surrounding them. "That's impossible," my father whispered, finally finding his voice. "Actually, it's not," Emma said, standing up to support me. "Luna has been successful for years while you two have been tearing her down. She owns this entire building, and you just publicly humiliated her in her own restaurant." My grandmother began to clap slowly, a huge smile spreading across her face. "Well done, sweetheart, well done." The rest of the family erupted in conversation. Uncle Mike shook his head in amazement. "This explains everything. The personalized service, the special attention, the way the staff treats you." Aunt Carol looked mortified. "Luna, I had no idea. I'm so sorry we didn't know about your success." But what happened next was the most satisfying part. My parents, who had spent decades dismissing my accomplishments and calling me a liar and attention seeker, were forced to confront the massive scope of their misjudgment. Not only had I succeeded beyond anything they had imagined, but I had done it quietly, without their support or acknowledgement, while they were actively undermining my credibility. The financial implications alone were staggering. Luna's generates over $2 million in annual revenue. The property is now worth $650,000. I employ 23 full-time staff members and have become a significant player in the local business community. I serve on the Restaurant Association Board, mentor other small business owners, and have been featured in business publications as an example of successful independent restaurant ownership. My parents attempted an awkward apology, but the damage was done. In front of 30 family members, they had revealed their true opinion of me at the exact moment when I could demonstrate how completely wrong they had been. Every relative present now understood the pattern of favoritism and dismissal that had shaped our family dynamic for decades. The conversation continued for another hour, but everything had changed. Family members who had witnessed years of my parents' preferential treatment toward Natalie suddenly understood that they had been watching the systematic undermining of someone who was actually the most successful person in the room. Cousins apologized for staying silent. Aunts and uncles admitted they had always felt the treatment was unfair, but hadn't spoken up. Most importantly, my grandmother pulled me aside as the evening wound down. "Luna, I've watched this dynamic for too long without saying enough. What you've built here is remarkable, but how you've handled tonight shows real character. I'm proud of you for succeeding on your own terms." The revelation completely shifted my position within the family permanently. But more than that, it validated every strategic decision I had made over the past decade. By building my success quietly and letting my work speak for itself, I had created an unshakable foundation that no amount of family drama could undermine. My parents left that night having learned that their fraud daughter was actually the most accomplished person in the family, and that their public dismissal of my character had taken place in a venue I owned and controlled. The irony was perfect, but the lesson was even better. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply continuing to build something undeniably real while others waste energy on empty criticisms. Within 6 months, the family dynamic had permanently shifted. My parents now ask about my business respectfully and have stopped their pattern of dismissive comments. Natalie, for her part, has actually become more supportive as she realized that our parents' favoritism had been limiting her own growth. Emma remains my closest family ally and frequently brings friends to dine at Luna's. James continues as my general manager and has become a trusted business advisor. Marcus was promoted to assistant manager for his professionalism that night. My grandmother visits monthly and always requests the same corner table where she can watch the dining room with pride. Uncle Mike and Aunt Carol have become regular customers and often recommend Luna's to their friends. And Luna's continues to thrive, booked solid months in advance, a testament to what's possible when you focus on building something meaningful rather than seeking validation from people who refuse to see your worth.